All right, circling back to one of our top stories, European leaders meeting in Paris for emergency talks have called for higher spending to ramp up the region's defense capabilities.
And this meeting was an attempt to forge a united and coordinated response to the Trump administration's policy shift on Ukraine.
Yeah, officials acknowledged they needed to do a better job of sharing the burden of financing defense, but remained split on the idea of deploying peacekeepers to Ukraine to back up any peace deal.
And there are concerns that a peacekeeping force would not only raise the risk of a direct confrontation with Russia, but also stretch the depleted arsenals of European armies.
For more with us is Aurel Braun, professor of international relations at the University of Toronto and a center associate of Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard University. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor. Firstly, I want to ask you just how could European leaders have been so caught off guard by the shift in U.S. policy under Mr. Trump? Could they have done more to anticipate this move, or was a transatlantic relationship just truly fragile?
This is both an excellent and important question. The Europeans should not have been caught off guard. There had been warnings about European defense, not only by Mr. Trump, but many other presidents. The Europeans somehow worked under the belief that the United States was going to defend the continent no matter what. And you can look at the pattern of expenditures on defense in Europe, even as European countries, particularly Western Europe, became wealthy and able to afford those things. They spent those funds on other matters. It's understandable, but the problem is you can't have it both ways. You can't proclaim that there is a very dire threat from Russia and at the same time not contribute sufficiently to meet that threat. So now what we're seeing is a virtually desperate attempt on the part of European leaders, particularly in Western Europe, to remain relevant as Mr. Trump is busy disrupting the international system, including the transatlantic alliance.
So a wide range of discussions happening right now in Paris on potential European troop deployment to Ukraine, defense spending dilemma, and diplomatic strategies. Professor, where do you see the key divisions lie? And can Europe present a united front in the face of the U.S. pivot?
Given all these matters that you just raised, it is essential to go back to the big picture. And that is, what exactly can Europe do right now, assuming the best intentions, assuming that they will try to mobilize? And I think what is really important to understand is that Europe is not united, that this meeting was called not by the European Union, but by the French president, who is an extraordinarily ambitious, fickle leader, given to many, many mistakes. And you can see how he has undermined his own position inside France. He has very little credibility. And we can see all sorts of fissures. We saw that the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz left early. We know that the British Prime Minister said, you must not leave the United States out. And so the big question is, can Europe do it on its own? And I would suggest they cannot, that the United States is the indispensable power. United States needs to continue to provide that massive nuclear umbrella, extended deterrence. The Europeans are not capable to do that from the perspective of nuclear deterrence because only 2 countries in Europe have a nuclear arsenal, and combined those arsenal do not match anywhere close to what Russia has. Not that Russia is a superpower, but the Europeans have allowed their defenses in the defense industries to run down so much that would take a large effort in many years to scale up. In the meantime, they need to have United States there. They need United States to provide the hard security guarantees, and that now is being questioned. And this is very disruptive, extremely dangerous for the alliance, and of course, inordinately dangerous for Ukraine.
Well, speaking of the ambitions of Emmanuel Macron, he was quick to get on the phone right after the summit with President Donald Trump. So speaking of that, how is this talk of boots on the ground helping to impress the Americans, to impress Donald Trump, along with discussions on increased defense spending among Europeans?
Well, one of the possible suggestions, because now what the Americans are saying is that the Ukrainians are not likely to be in NATO. And I think without NATO, it's hard to see how you could have viable security guarantees. So there is this attempt now to try to find some kind of alternative to massage the problem. And historically, this has not worked really well. Mr. Zelensky talked about the possibility of a European army, but at the same time, he made it very clear that the Americans have to participate in that. They have to provide forces. Now, the Europeans at the moment don't have that much to provide. And if they were to provide boots on the ground, would these boots on the ground, so to speak, be merely tripwire? Or would they be able to actually be deployed on a scale that is massive enough that they would ensure that Russia could not renew its aggression in Ukraine? If they were to do that, they would have to deplete their forces on their home territories. They would need to have an overall agreement, or they would have to do it on a bilateral basis, which would impair credibility. So this is a huge, huge dilemma. And it's very unfortunate that Mr. Trump, who wants to look like a winner, who wants to be Churchill, is at risk by being badly advised to throw Ukraine under the bus. Hopefully that will not happen. And he could wind up being Chamberlain. And so I think these negotiations that are likely to take place between Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin are extremely risky. And the best we can hope for is that Mr. Trump will come to realize that there is no serious negotiating partner on the other side, that Mr. Putin does not wish to have a genuine peace. What he would like to do is to be able to take over Ukraine eventually on the installment plan.
I mean, there's absolutely a growing concern that the U.S. may broker a deal without Ukraine's direct involvement. Professor, what sort of specific terms do you think he would find acceptable, at least in a peace deal, to end this war?
Any fighting that will come to an end would have to be something permanent. Ukraine is entitled, even if it has to concede territory, to be able then to protect that territory with great assurance and be able to rebuild. Ukraine has an enormous amount of potential. It has tremendous intellectual people talent. It has vast natural resources. It could become a very successful democracy that would be an example of what can be done in the post-Soviet sphere. But this is, of course, something that Mr. Putin does not want, because what Mr. Putin fears the most, not even NATO, not even the EU, he fears democracy the most. And he would not like to see a large Slavic state on his borders that becomes a vibrant, successful democracy with an internationally competitive economy. So to guarantee that security, it cannot be done without the United States. And if the United States is going to do it, the best vehicle is NATO. And this is why I suggested that the agreement that could lead to some kind of territorial compromise would need to be contingent on Ukraine becoming a member of NATO. Mm-hmm. And now that has become more distant. And this is why whatever negotiations take place, they can go two ways. Either they will fail and there will be a realization on the part of the Trump administration that the isolationists have given him very bad advice, or he could make a huge historical mistake and basically try to appease Russia. But there is one fly in the ointment, so to speak. Mr. Zelensky has indicated that he's not going to play Czechoslovakia in 1938 in case the United States is willing to abandon them.
Incredible World War II and earlier historical references there. Thank you so much, Aurel Braun, Professor of International Relations at the University of Toronto and Center Associate at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies of Harvard University. Appreciate it.